Hello everybody, I'm Aleks Nikoli, a judge in the criminal section at the District Court of Albania, and at the same time a PhD candidate at the European University of Tirana. I'm going to introduce for you today my paper, which is about the overcrowding of Albanian prisons, a quantitative analysis of evolution and causes.
This paper will discuss overcrowding of prisons in Albania, solution of overcrowding through amnesties, reasons for the increase in convicted prisoners, punitive criminal justice policies in this category, application of alternatives to imprisonment, and the increasing number of detainees. Introduction. Nowadays, prison overcrowding is a global problem. A high incarceration rate of citizens has high humanitarian, social, and economic costs for a country. Although Albania in 1994 had a rate of 34 prisoners per 100,000 inhabitants, for some years it has been one of a list of countries with a high level of prisoners, with overcrowding of penitentiary institutions. This paper aims to explore the situation of prison population in Albania and analyze some of the main reasons behind it. People deprived of their liberty in prisons are divided into convicted prisoners and detained in custody during preliminary investigation or trials. Consequently, the paper will address separately the increase in the number of convicted prisoners and the increase in the number of detainees. Methodology and materials. For the purposes of this study, we used annual statistical data published by the Ministry of Justice for 2004 to 2012 and data published by the General Department of Prisons on prisoner numbers for years 2006 to 2014. Useful data were also obtained from the European Sourcebook of Crime and Criminal Justice Statistics and the ICPS. First, through charts present in the paper, the aim is to give a picture of the evolution of prisoner numbers in Albania and then to compare these findings with those of several other European countries. Further, through quantitative methods and interpretation of data, we analyze the causes behind the increasing number of sentenced prisoners and detainees. The paper analyzes the effect of the harsh penal policy pursued by Albanian legislature and the toughening of sentences and a wave of public opinion towards severe punishment for any illegal conduct. Overcrowding of prisons in Albania. In 1995, Albania had only 7 penitentiary institutions with a maximum capacity of 1,200 inmates or a rate of 37 per 100,000 inhabitants. Furthermore, year on year, the hosting capacity for prisoners has been increased by building new prisons, so that in October 2012, the capacity of Albanian prisons went up to 4,500 places. Currently in Albania, there are 22 prisons and detention centers in operation, with further new prisons due to come into service. Although the construction of new facilities has helped to relieve the overcrowding situation, it has not managed to solve it, because the number of prisoners has increased at the same rate, if not more, than the increase in prison capacity. While each year Albania has an urgent requirement for new prisons, in November 2013, 4 Swedish prisons were to be closed due to an out-of-the-ordinary decline in prisoner numbers. Figure 1 below shows the trend of imprisonment rates from 2000 to 2014 in Albania. The rate for 2014 is calculated based on a population of 3.2 million inhabitants, but according to Instat, the current resident population of Albania is less than 2.9 million. So, based on these population figures, the imprisonment rate in Albania in April 2014 would actually be 203 per 100,000. According to the International Center for Prison Studies, in 2011, Albania had a higher rate than most of the Balkan countries, apart from Montenegro, which had a rate of 227. In an attempt to explore and explain the situation of overcrowding in Albanian prisons, we will analyze the numbers of people convicted by Albanian courts and compare this with some other European countries. As can be seen in this figure, the number of people found guilty by the Albanian courts doubled between 1999 and 2012. The increase in the numbers of convicted people is only a broad indication. As the nature and severity level of the sentences are not considered, we cannot calculate the effect the sentences have on the growth of the prison population. Despite the above increase shown in the conviction rate, when compared with other European countries, Albania has a very low rate of criminality. This chart shows this fact. By analyzing these data and comparing them with the imprisonment rate data, it can be concluded that a high conviction rate does not necessarily bring a high imprisonment rate. For example, while Finland and Denmark have the highest conviction rates, they have the lowest imprisonment rates of 56 and 74 per 100 respectively. Solution of overcrowding through amnesties. According to the data published by the General Department of Prisons, it was noted that as a result of benefits from an amnesty law, the number of convicted prisoners had decreased by at least 602 people or 19%. Although the amnesty contributed significantly to reducing the number of convicted inmates in these institutions, it was unable to contribute to a reduction in the number of detainees, which in June 2014 reached a historical peak of 2,050 people, exceeding for the first time the number of convicted prisoners. So, although the amnesty of April 2014 decreased the concentration rate in prisons, this number was still well above the region's average and much higher than the capacity of the country's penitentiary institutions, resulting in overcrowding in prisons approximately 20% above the norm. Although not to the same degree, the amnesty of 2012 also failed to resolve the prison overcrowding situation, where the number of incarcerated people was significantly lower. Reasons for the increase in convicted prisoners. Punitive criminal justice policies in this category. The numerous legal changes to the criminal code have affected most of the sanctions for these offenses. From a study of the 15 legislative changes made to the criminal code, it is noted that mostly they have aggravated the existing sanctions. In order to analyze the level of severity of punishment stipulated by Albanian courts, Table 1 presents details of sentences between 2004 to 2012. As can be seen from this table, the increase in the number of convicted people did not contribute to an increase in the number of people sentenced to life imprisonment or heavy sentences, 5 to 25 years. Furthermore, the number of people sentenced to imprisonment of 10 to 25 years has declined significantly in recent years. The largest increase is shown in the fine sentences and light prison sentences, up to 5 years. Legislative initiatives enacting new offenses in the criminal code and the tendency to aggravate sanctions for existing offenses are commonly presented by governments as part of a successful reform and as a clear expression of the will to fight crime. Application of alternatives to imprisonment. The application of alternative sentencing is one way to relieve prison overcrowding in the country. The Albanian Penal Code provides for these alternatives to imprisonment: semi-liberty, suspension of imprisonment and placing on probation, house arrest, suspension of imprisonment, and the obligation to perform work in the public interest, and release on parole. In judicial practice to date, the suspension of imprisonment and placing on probation has been the most applied alternative, while the other four have found little application. According to Ministry of Justice data, in the last 5 years, the number of cases where a prison sentence has been suspended have increased slightly. The relevant data are presented in this figure. Due to legal restrictions, the application of other sentence alternatives to imprisonment has been very small and inconsiderable, and it is only since 2013 that the courts have begun to more frequently assign sentences involving the suspension of imprisonment and the obligation to perform work in the public interest. Early conditional release. A very important alternative in determining the physiognomy of the main purpose intended in sentencing is early conditional release. Originally, the Albanian Criminal Code envisioned the minimum term as serving half the sentence to gain eligibility for early conditional release. But with the changes made to the Penal Code in 2001, these timelines were extended, making the minimum terms to be served not less than 2/3 of the sentence imposed for crimes with punishment of up to 5 years imprisonment and not less than 3/4 of the sentence imposed for crimes with punishment measures of 5 to 25 years imprisonment. These possibilities are further limited by the third paragraph of Article 64, which prohibits the release on parole of recidivists convicted for crimes committed intentionally and for 5 other serious offenses, thus in practice making the early release on parole for serious crimes a very rare possibility and for less serious crimes a hard option. The increasing number of detainees. Detainees are the second category of inmates of penitentiary institutions. Article 232 of the Albanian Criminal Procedure Code sets out 7 coercive precautionary measures: prohibition from leaving the country, compulsion to appear before the judicial police, prohibition or obligation to stay in a certain place, patrimonial bail, house arrest, jail arrest, and temporary hospitalization in a psychiatric hospital. Article 230, first paragraph of the Criminal Procedure Code expressly limits the use of jail arrest. The High Court has elaborated on this legal restriction on assigning jail arrest in a number of its decisions. Despite the clear legal framework, in reality the situation regarding the use of this preliminary measure by the district and appeal courts is completely different. A clearer picture regarding the enforcement of 4 of the most commonly used preliminary coercive measures is represented in this figure. As observed in this data, jail arrest is the most common of the preliminary coercive measures, and in 2012 it significantly increased. All the other preliminary measures are applied less frequently and have a stable trend, with the exception of the obligation to appear before the judicial police, which has increased significantly. The security measure of patrimonial bail is rarely applied by courts, even though it is more lenient in terms of human rights and offers good guarantees that the defendant won't run away. Based on the figures of the General Department of Prisons for 2014, it can be assumed that the use of jail arrest has increased even more during the last 2 years. The increased number of detainees is an indicator of the climate of pressure on the justice system to satisfy public opinion concerning the immediate steps that the government is taking against crime. The highly political populism on issues of criminality and the inadequate interpretation by the media of the performance of the prosecution and judicial system affects the situation. In many cases, judges set aside the legal criteria for assigning preliminary measures in order to avoid being identified as hindering the tough stance of the government against crime. Conclusions. The number of those incarcerated has been increasing in Albania, and in 2014 it reached a figure of 5,883 prisoners, or a rate of 203 prisoners per 100,000 inhabitants. Although the conviction rate has been growing in the last 20 years, Albania still has one of the lowest rates in Europe. Therefore, the prison overcrowding is caused as a result of the harsh criminal policy against those people arrested by the police and prosecution and later sentenced by courts. Aggravating the sentence measures and raising the minimum sentences for petty offences with low social danger, instead of bringing a measurable reduction of criminality, has led to an increase in the number of prisoners and subsequent prison overcrowding. The pro-imprisonment spirit has also inhibited the application of fines and imprisonment alternatives. Furthermore, the Albanian legislature has not only increased the length of sentences stipulated for many criminal offences, but also the proportion of the prison term that has to be served in order to qualify for early conditional release. In addition, the increasing number of detainees have substantially affected the prison overcrowding in a way that even the frequent amnesties are unable to solve.
Thank you very much for your attention. For any eventual question, you can contact me on email.